Great to see you all this morning. All right, so we are going to start a new tradition involving all of these flags. So first of all, these are called guidons. That's a strange word. Let's all practice that together. Pretty simple. Guidon. A guidon. And guidon comes from a French word, which means to guide home. And so in English, years and years later, like 3,000 years later, this is just called a guidon. And a guidon is an old thing, which is why we like it at Liberty. We like old things that we can make really exciting today for us. And so different groups, if you were a king or a queen, you would usually have a guidon that travels around with you. Or if you were a group of people, maybe in a military or just some other group, maybe a group of religious people, you would have a guidon with you to travel as you travel through the countryside. And so the real value of it is it's a little tool for just leading a group, holding a group together, for cohesion of a group, building a little family or a little platoon. And so if you get scattered, like at recess, and the whistle blows and it's time to gather, what would you do? You look for your guidon and go there and line up behind it. And so in our school, we're going to start this tradition, and I'll tell you why in a minute, of wherever the group goes, the guidon leads the way. And the guidon speaks in some respects. For example, if we're getting organized, that somebody will be designated to raise the guidon. It might be a teacher, it might be a teacher assistant, it might be a student who gets designated to be the guidon bearer for that moment or maybe that day. You guys can decide that in your classrooms, how you're going to do that. But when the guidon goes up, everybody's got to pay attention, get in line or gather, and listen for instructions. And if the guidon moves, you're probably going to be moving with it. When you go back to your classroom, the guidon's going to go there too. And you'll see we had a student from the high school who made all kinds of stands, different kinds, group ones for several, and then some that are just by themselves. And so that's where they go. So like this is obviously a group stand because there's several that are in there. And then some of them that'll be in your classroom or by themselves. So when you come to lunch here, for example, you bring your guidon with you, look for this stand, put your guidon there, and that lets everybody know that your class is here. And then when you're done, let's say you go out to the playground, whoever the guidon barrier is, you'll take it out and you'll find a stand out there, you put your guidon there, and when it's time to come in, the whistle blows, look for your guidon, and that will lead you to class and your guidon is there. So it'll go everywhere that the group goes. Everywhere. We got that? So there's, that's now the reason we want to do this is because when you get to junior high, we have groups that we're really developing. They're called orders. It's the order system, and it is a way to train students toward leadership and organizing through orders. And then when you get to high school, we call them houses. And so for me, I thought, well, what could we do we started with the house system, and then we thought, well, let's create an order system for 7th and 8th graders to train them for the house system. And then I was thinking, well, what can we do to train kindergarten through 6th graders to get ready for the order system? And that's what we're going to start at the school. So this is new today and for now, but in just a few months, you're gonna be used to this, and you're just gonna be always looking for your guidon. Does that make sense to everyone? So the first thing we're going to do with this ceremony, and Mrs. Stoltz says it's the only time we're going to do this, it's true, because once we hand these out, you're just going to have them for the rest of your time at Liberty, and we won't have to do this ceremony again. So this is a one and only thing, and these are going to travel with you. If you're, let's say, the 2nd graders, whatever guidons you get today, those same three are going to stay with your group, your class, all the way until you're finished with the 6th grade. And then once that's done, so 6th graders, you're going to get them for 1 year, and when you're done, we'll leave them in a place here in the school so that they'll always be there. You can always come back and see them. And one last thing, we're going to give all kinds of awards. Ribbons and buttons and pins. So when you win competitions or do something that is meritorious, something that is good, that we want to remember, you'll get something to stick on your guidon. So by the time you're done, this thing will just be coated with all kinds of buttons and ribbons and pins and patches and all kinds of fun things. Do you have a question? It's got to be quick. Go ahead. How does it go with you from grade to grade? Well, you'll leave it here over the summer, but when you come back in the next grade, your guide-on will be in your next grade with you, in a different classroom probably. You have 3 classrooms, so you might not get the same one when you come back, but you'll get one that's in your grade, one of the 3, okay? Does that make sense? So so 6th graders, you're gonna lead the way. And so we're gonna start off with, I'm gonna give the guide-ons to your teachers, but when I call the 6th grade, I'd like all the 6th graders to stand when I call. 6th grade teachers will come up, I'll give them the guide-ons for you, and then they'll bring them back and put them in what are those things called? The little stands. They'll put them in the stands, and when they do, then that just signifies that that's where you are. You can sit down then, and then we'll give them to the 5th grade and 4th grade, on up till we get to the kindergartners, and you'll get to go last. So 6th graders, you're going to show everybody else how this is done. So let's start. Let me ask the 6th graders to please stand to receive your guide-ons. Mrs. Brennan, Mrs. Juergens, Mr. Huey, please join me up here. In 5th grade, you're on deck. And so we're going to start off with Mr. Huey's class is going to get a guide-on, and each one has a Roman virtue. They're stated in Latin, and you guys can add some depth to this. So severitas is the first one, which means sternness or gravity and self-control. So severitas. Here is the first guide-on for Mr. Huey. And then the next guide-on is pietas, which means piety, love, dutifulness, devotion to others. Mrs. Juergens, this is for your class. And the last one is gaudium, and gaudium means joy. Mrs. Brennan is going to receive that one. And so 6th graders, please keep standing until your guide-ons are in place, and then you can be seated. So as that's taking place, listen to me carefully, everyone. A flag on a stick is kind of a cool thing. We need to treat these with respect. If I see them being waved around or playing games with them or hitting kids with them or using them as swords, we're going to have to take them away. And so you have to be responsible with these. Can we all agree on that? Yeah. Excellent. So since we have an agreement on that, all of us, we're going to count on that. All right, 5th graders, please stand to receive your guide-ons. Ms. Cardenas, this guide-on says fides, which means confidence. Mrs. Hickman's guide-on is frugalitas, which means frugalness, economy, and simplicity of style, being productive. And Ms. Hirsch is ops, which means wealth, acknowledgement of prosperity of the Roman world. There you go. So nice job. I like the way this is working, everyone. So everybody watch these 5th graders when their guide-ons in place. Well, then they sit down, and these guide-ons will go with them when they all go back to their classrooms and for the rest of their time at Liberty. All right, 4th graders, please stand to receive your guide-ons. Mr. Senior's guide-on is hilaritas, which means mirth, rejoicing, an expression of happy times. For Mrs. Howe's class, bonus eventus, which means good fortune. And Mrs. Robinson's guide-on is providentia, which means forethought. Nice job, 5th graders, 4th graders. 3rd graders, please stand to receive your guide-ons. So Mrs. James' class is known by concordia, which means harmony. Mrs. Duran's class, pax, which means peace. And Mrs. Greenacre's class, auctoritas, which means spiritual authority. Nice job, third graders. Okay, second graders, please stand. Mrs. Galener's class is going to be known by the Felicitas flag, which means happiness and prosperity. Mrs. Young's class will be known by the Virtus flag, which means courage. Mrs. Horton's class, Fortuna, which means fortune. Oh. Miss Brooks' class, there we go. Sorry to skip one. Miss Brooks' class will be known by Letitia, which means delight, wonder, and joy. So while we're waiting for the second grade teachers to go back to their groups, does anybody have a parent or aunt or uncle or grandfather or a sibling who's in the military? Raise your hand if you do. Oh, good, lots of you do. So here's what I'd like you to do. Ask them, those of you who have those relatives. Okay, hands down, quiet, eyes on me. Ask them about guidons. Almost all of them have guidons and know about guidons, and maybe they can give you some advice on what you can do with them, the kinds of things you can do in your classroom, and you can advise your classroom on some cool things that we can do with these guidons to make some great traditions, because they use them a lot in their work. Where were we? First grade. For the first graders, please stand. So Mrs. Temez, Veritas means truthfulness. Now Mrs. Horton, Fortuna, which means fortune. And Mrs. Brown, Clementia, which means merciful. Okay, first graders, you can all be seated. And then finally, the kindergartners. Are you ready? Please stand to receive your guidons. Mrs. Devaney's Salubritas means wholesomeness, health, and cleanliness. Yeah, we need that. And Mrs. Miller's guidon is Via Romana, which means the Roman way, and the Roman way kind of describes this whole process. All of these virtues are part of the Roman way. And so there we have them all stated. At the Aristotle campus, they have guidons as well, very similar, different words, different colors. And so everybody in the whole school in kindergarten through sixth grade is going to get used to this fun little strategy. Now, the first thing you notice is it's pretty colorful. So we're adding more color and beauty into the school. So once again, I want to finish with this as we pick up, as you go back to class, and we're pretty much finished. Always treat your guidons with respect. When they go up, how many of you have been a line leader before? Yeah, so if you've ever been a line leader, let's think that the guidons help with that. If you're a line leader, now you're going to just carry instead of hold up your hand or be out in front, you're going to have a guidon to help you with that. That's just think where you held your hand up before, now you just hold up a guidon. So that's real simple on what the guidon is for, what it looks like, and how everybody else should respond to that. But second, I want them to be treated with respect. Because they represent your class and everybody in it, in your group. They all have a virtue on it, and I'll let your teachers help guide for you to understand more about what these virtues mean and how you can live them, and what they mean, how you can describe these virtues to your friends and your family and others. And then ultimately, we want to live all of these virtues. These are all virtues because they help us, they help guide us and help develop our character, how we behave, and help us become good people. So they're good words to think about if we add meaning to them by how we behave when we're associated with them. So does that make sense to everybody? It's a pretty good tradition. So it's new right now, but trust me, in just a few months, it's going to feel like we've had guidons forever. and we will have guide-ons forever going forward. So with that, let's let the guide-ons guide us home to our classrooms.